Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 210. Today's episode, I am interviewing Mary Hayashi. Mary is the author of the book Women in Politics, Breaking Down the Barriers to Achieve True Representation. Come to find out, when we did this interview, we actually live in the same neck of the woods, literally 20 minutes away from each other. So we probably should have done the interview in person. I have no doubt after the end of this that we would have had so much fun talking about power and influence for women. But it just really is an incredible, incredible conversation. And as I was thinking about how to do this introduction and to get you excited about this conversation, I was looking at the back of her book, and it has this beautiful, beautiful review from Mariel Hemingway. It says, "Women in Politics is a book that inspires women, reminding them that their voice does matter. But it's more than that. Mary's political and other achievements are significant, not because she is a woman, but because she worked tirelessly to ensure their importance." And in this podcast interview, she is giving you so many ways that you can work to ensure your importance as well. So I'm really excited to share her incredible new book with you, as well as this interview and all of her wisdom. Let's get started. Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out, because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. Today, I have a very special guest on my podcast, and I have to admit that I was inspired to bring her on today based on one of the women in the leadership table who has been working in the political sector for a while, helping other women take office. And some of the work that we've been doing is getting her into higher levels of leadership positions so that she can continue to support her mission in politics. And I have always really, really admired the work that she's doing. And whenever I come across political figures, I live out here in Berkeley, California, and I've been told by several parents at my kids' school, you should work to get more women and women of color into office here in Berkeley. We could use them, right? And so it seems like the work that I do really translates into the political realm. And I want to learn more about that, both for myself, how I can help more women, but really just to kind of reiterate the theme, which is that we talk a lot about corporate leadership. And in my mind, the highest level of leaders in the United States, all across the world, are those women who are in political positions of power and influence, and really making sure that they not only get elected, but that they have that influence, have that voice at the table. And so I couldn't think of anybody better than Mary Hayashi to come onto my podcast and to talk about her new book, Women in Politics. And we're just going to dive right in. So thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Stacy, for that very kind introduction. And congratulations to you on your second anniversary of your book publishing as well. So thank you. I'm very honored to be part of it. And can't wait to tell you all.
Yeah. Well, let me do a more formal introduction so that people know exactly who you are. And then we'll just dive into some questions. Mary Hayashi, a former California State Assemblymember and an award-winning author, recently released her new book, Women in Politics, Breaking Down the Barriers to Achieve True Representation. Women in Politics is a compelling exploration of the strides made by women in government. All right, Mary, let's start out with the question I like to ask all my guests, which is, for you personally, what do you feel like have been some of your secrets to success?
I think the best way to answer that is to quote one of the women that I interviewed for the book. LaFranza Butler, as you know, she's our U.S. Senator now. When I interviewed her, she was the president of Emily's List. And she has incredible personal, story as well. And she has done so much to lift up other women. So during the interview, I asked her this question, sort of similar to what you just asked me. And, she said, do it anyway. And I think that really captures, my professional journey. I started a nonprofit organization when I was 26 years old, and I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know anything. I was just a kid, but I really wanted to address Asian American women's health issues because at the time, there wasn't really an organized effort to address mental health issues in Asian American women. So, just thinking about my sister and her passing when she was a teenager, and, she died by suicide, and I was really impacted by that. And so I wanted to do something, and I just did it. And so I think it's not a super secret because it's in my first book as well, but I've always, just went ahead and did it. Even though a lot of people said, you don't know what you're doing, and they were probably right. I thought that I had something to contribute, and I wanted to bring something to the table. And LaFranza Butler interview, basically, she summarized it by saying women often approach challenges with what we don't have. We start from a place of lack, what we don't bring to the table. What we need to do is think about what we do bring to the table. And so she said, do it anyway. Doesn't need to be perfect. If you got passion for something, just do it anyway. And I think that's sort of what I've done with the nonprofit work and also just running for office. A lot of people said I should run for something else first, like a local city council or something like that. But, I did it anyway and I won. So that's my my advice to others as well. If you got passion for something, why not?
Right. Oh my God. I love that so much. I know we're going to get into this, so I'm just going to cut right to it. Okay. So all of the women that I meet, every single one of them wants to do it anyway. Like really, truthfully, right? I mean, there could be the part of themselves that says, I'm not sure if I'm ready, but they really do try, right? I feel like there is this barrier to our passion, what we really see, the change we want to seek out in the world, and our ability to actually institute that change. And so this is the mission of my business, is to help women actually find themselves in a position where they can institute that change, take their passions, and then create that. What do you feel like are those barriers? I mean, that's the subtitle of your book, the barriers that the women are facing in, I guess, politics in general, to be able to, they follow their passion, they do it anyway, they get elected. And then what?
There's a really interesting study that I included in my book about ambition and qualification gap. So ambition and qualification, because in my book, I break down the three main cultural barriers: ambition gap, qualification gap, and ability double standards. And we can go into that a little bit, in addition to other barriers that I talk about. But I think the most relevant conversation for your followers, your listeners, is this study that it's called Men Rule. And, they asked women and men what's identical qualifications if they feel that they are qualified to run for public office. Well, most of the women said they were not. They felt that they were not qualified, even though more men said they are qualified. But what's really interesting is that men who rated themselves not qualified, they said they would run anyway. A lot of them would. Whereas, women, not only did they rate themselves not qualified when they were actually qualified, none of the women who said they were not qualified would run. So there's a sort of cultural gap there. And I think that some of these barriers were, systemic, institutional level, but also it's the way we view ourselves and the way we view our own sort of qualifications. And, in the corporate world, for instance, men apply for positions, when they only meet 60% of the required qualifications on the job announcement. Whereas women would only apply if they meet every single required qualification. So unless they have 100% checked off, like, okay, I have all of these experiences, women will not apply. Whereas men, they would apply even if they're only at 60%. And so I think what we need to start thinking about is, what we, again, just going back to LaFonza's quote, it's like, let's not start from what we lack. What do we have? And it's not always our fault, because did you know that men get evaluated? And you probably do, because you're in leadership world, but it's like men get evaluated on their potential, what they could bring to the company. Whereas, women are evaluated differently. So I do think that there are sort of barriers at the institutional level that will, that will take a long time to change. But it doesn't mean that as individuals, we can't do something. I think we can really we can start thinking about our qualifications in sort of different way.
Right.
We are qualified to run. We are qualified to apply for that job. We are qualified for that promotion. That's a study that I included in the book that I think really speaks to women seeking leadership position just across the board, whether in politics or corporate world.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And, it really speaks to that ambition gap and then also the skills gap. And now I want to kind of focus a little bit more on that likability, which is the piece that you were kind of alluding to. Like the McKinsey Women in the Workplace report came out. And once again, it pointed to the men are promoted by the potential and women are promoted based on their results, right? Their past results. And unfortunately, I find that even women don't even get promoted based on their past results. So they even have to go above and beyond. And I'm sure that as a woman of color yourself, too, there is also the double bind dilemma of women of color face an even other obstacle, which is that their results have to be at a much higher standard than anybody else. It must come into play, this likability gap. I mean, you can explain more about what that means, but I just really love to hear your perspective about what you're seeing.
The ambition gap and all of these sort of are interconnected, but women are trained to not to take credit for our work. We can't be ambitious because we get penalized for that. Because remember, for women to get elected, not only do you have to be qualified, you have to prove that you're qualified, but we also have to be likable. I mean, there's no better example than Hillary Clinton. She's overqualified, but people said they didn't like her. So for women, we have to be liked and we have to be qualified. We have to prove that. We get penalized for seeking leadership position. There's another study that I talk about where women, when they announce, their candidacy, they start at deficit because for us, we're not supposed to be ambitious. We're not supposed to be seeking leadership position. It's perfectly okay if a male candidate says, well, I want to run for president because I want more power. Like Bill Clinton said, he run for president because he met JFK. I mean, that was his reason. And during my research, I was reading Willie Brown's book when he ran for San Francisco mayor. He said, it's a step down for me from the state level, but, power is like an addiction. You got to have that. So I'm going to run anyway. I mean, can you imagine?
Oh my God, people went out of yes.
So we're not supposed to be ambitious. And so a lot of studies say women need to be recruited and they won't run for office unless they're asked to run. Whereas men, they're so used to self-nominating because they're supposed to be ambitious. One of the women I interviewed in the book, Celinda Lake, in her book, she talked about how, women start their own business because they want to be flexible. They want to be there for their kids and they want to be available for their spouse or whatever. They work for themselves because they want to have the flexibility in their schedule. Men, they start their own business because they want to be the leader. They want to be the owner. They want to be the president and CEO of their own company. And that's celebrated. And so that kind of gender bias, puts women candidates at a significant disadvantage. And a lot of times, when the press, talks about what women are wearing, and they don't do that with like Bernie Sanders, for example. that rarely talk about it.
We could talk about it, but it's like
they love it. They're like, oh, yeah, right.
It's cute, right? Yeah.
But they talked about how like Kamala Harris wore a brown suit at the State of the Union. So nobody's talking like Joe Biden talked about it for a State of the Union address. Everybody's talking about
what she wore.
Kamala, yes, UPS uniform. That's what they called her. It was
right. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's all of those things.
Yeah,
to likability double standard, where it's okay to criticize women, or talk about women's style over substance, and all of those things play into these three cultural barriers that I talked about earlier.
Right. Thank you for taking the time to talk about it. I really felt like my eyes opened when I saw the Barbie movie that came out this year, as to the importance of stating the obvious that's happening for us as women, because, that was their power. They regained their power once they were truly able to see the barriers in front of them. Because I believe personally, once we can see what's happening, see that double bind dilemma, right? Then we can make a choice to move forward and to progress and do it anyway. Right. And we can take it away from maybe I'm not ready. And it's like, oh, you know what? Maybe it's actually not you. Maybe it's society that says over and over again that you're not ready because you're a woman. Right. And so to be able to kind of just see that and move forward anyway. So you spoke in your book. It's a series of interviews. And so storytelling must be a huge component for you and your motivation. And you talked about your secret to success to be doing it anyway. But I also I'm just going to infer that part of your secret to success must be connecting with other women who are doing it anyway. And so when we surround ourselves with people who are going on this journey and these stories, right? So I feel like that's got to be a huge part of the power of your book. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, I think you just summarized it perfectly. One of the podcasts that you did earlier had to do with asking how to ask for a raise, or how you could try to get more money from your employer. And I think that's such a great topic for women, because we need tools. And even for me, and one of the stories that I talk about in my book is that growing up, we were not allowed to solicit money, from strangers. And we were very much, we were discouraged to talk about money at all. That's just like a cultural thing. And so my first job, when I moved up to the Bay Area, my first job during the interview, I didn't even ask the potential employer, how much the position pays, because it was just something that we were raised not to do. Being a good girl means don't bring it up. And when the HR person asked me, do you want to know how much this pays? I was really uncomfortable. I didn't even think.
You're like, does it pay money? Well, money, then I'm good.
Well, because the Asian wow is we're supposed to be grateful for anything. That's kind of from a young age, girls are often, taught to just kind of diminish, their skills and devalue what they bring too. So it's not just the money as a topic, but it's just, we don't brag or we don't promote ourselves. God, no, we don't take credit for anything. I went from that to when I was running for office, making cold calls to these strange men and asking for money for my campaign. And so, for me to do that and make that kind of transition, it takes a toll, and it's a very difficult process, And so it's, yes, I really appreciate you talking about my successes, but, everyone has failures too. And I thinking back, I could have done that better. I had so many of those moments, and I still have those sort of good girl training that I got when I was a kid, sort of creeping back up, am I taking too much credit for this success? Maybe I shouldn't evaluate myself so highly. And when you're a candidate, you got to be able to talk about yourself comfortably and talk about your achievements and what you've done. And it was very difficult for me to do that. Going back to your point, one of the goals for my book is to inspire other women by showcasing these examples that you could create your own life path. Because somebody like me, I mean, I did it, and you don't have to be controlled by your backgrounds or ethnicity or family histories. And so, I'm an example of what can be done. And there are all these other women who had to overcome significant barriers to achieving leadership positions. And so you're exactly right. When I was a kid, I really could not fathom a life like this. And the only way that this was all possible was because I had other examples that I could see. And Barbara Lee, Family Foundation Executive Director Amanda Hunter, who I interviewed, summarized the best. She said that they gave a name to this problem, imagination barrier. They did focus groups with women and men and asked them to envision a governor. And most of them envisioned a white male. And she gave it a name. She said imagination barrier. Like, you can't be what you cannot see. And I had so many great feminist women of color leaders, women who were just incredible, mentor me and show me how to do it. And that's the only reason why I was able to start the organization, because Billy Avery, who founded the National Black Women's Health Project, said, "Oh, we really need this for Asian American women. This is how you do it. This is who you need to call for money. This is how you put together."
Wow.
And that was incredible. And for me to have an opportunity to work with those leaders and feminists really changed my life. So you're right. This book is about that. It's exactly that. I want women to see that if you got passion for this, there's a pathway. And I didn't speak English when I came to this country, and I published 2 books. I just want to say that it really doesn't matter, what your family history is, or what your personal background is, what your ethnicity is. You can really do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So inspiring.
Oh, Stacy, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I just was like, my eyes got really big when you were like, okay, so not only do you have to get yourself elected, or, even the first phase, which is like, I'm going to run for election, but I'm going to call a bunch of white men and ask them for money. I was like, oh my God.
I know. Well, back then,
what your life is,
in 2006, there was no social media, and internet was just kind of like bubbling up. I mean, it was just a very different time back then. And you didn't reach out to people on Facebook. You call people, you cold call. You get a list, and you call these people. And if you're a Democrat, you have to go talk to unions. And a lot of union leadership at the time, and I think still is, but were men. And I had to call them, and I was like, oh, this is me. I'm great. I want to run. I think I can be really good at this. And can I have some money? I mean, that was just so difficult. This is what it's required. And I raised a lot of money for my nonprofit. I mean, I raised like $10 million in the first few years of starting my nonprofit organization, and had enormous amount of success. But that was different. Like, when you're raising money for a cause that you believe in, that's really different. But when you're running for office, you have to talk about yourself. Very much like in the corporate world, when you go and apply for a job and interview or try to get promotion, you have to talk about what you bring, what your skill sets are. And I had such a hard time doing that. And then you get used to it. But I still find myself kind of checking, even to this day, because of my upbringing and the culture that I'm from. And my parents really had no other expectation of me than get married and have kids. So even to this day, I'll be in a meeting and I'll be like, oh, did I talk too much? Did I take too much credit? Did I just feel too aggressive? Because I mentioned earlier, being an Asian woman sometimes, isn't always, you're not always seen as a leader, because we're, our stereotype is like, oh, we're great. We have to be grateful for anything, and we're quiet. Our culture celebrates silence as strength. When you're quiet, that means actually you're a really strong person. And so everything's just sort of reversed. And so when I got elected and I chaired a very powerful position, Business and Professions Committee, and a lot of people just didn't know how to work with me, they never really worked with an Asian female as like their colleague.
Mhm.
And when I was assertive, they'll say, "Oh gosh, she's so aggressive." You know, there was a lot of criticism of my style because they weren't really used to seeing an Asian woman in leadership position, I thought. So I also talk about that in my book. There were one other Asian woman in the legislature at the time, and they would confuse us like all the time. And when I started writing the book, I found this research about misidentification, why people get people of color confused. And it explained so much. And I realized, not at the time anyway, because at the time I just kind of like roll with it. Because anybody can just do that. Anybody can like have that sort of slip up, so I just kind of roll with it. But when I thought about it more, when I was doing the research, we really talked about how it takes a toll and it kind of says that you're not important. Because, and one example that I gave in the book is that you go to work every day and you see the same people every day.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm your supervisor, I have a feeling you're going to remember me. Like you're not going to call me Fiona. So it just says that you're not important. You're not worth remembering.
Mm-hmm.
And and it does really hurt you.
I was reading Raising an Anti-Racist with my daughter, and one of the points brought up in that book, it talks about just literally the cognitive dissonance between representation. And if we don't see a certain, like the reason that we see white faces differently and we're able to differentiate is because we see them all the time, right? And so you can see the difference in their eyes. You can see it. And there's literally a part of our brain that when we don't have representation, when we don't see people who look like that, then we do mix it up in our brain until we can see more and more Asian women, right? Like it's just like quite literally. And so I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So when I am choosing books and choosing, images and things to put in front of my children, I'm making sure that I am diversifying all of the imagery that they're seeing. And in this book, it was just basically stating that is a place to start, right? Because I think for most, especially women leaders, we would never want to do that purposefully, right? Like it would just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I keep mixing up their names. And so there is like a solution to this problem. Like we just need more visual imagery. Like we could start there, right? I love that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that
up.
Stop it. Yeah, I did see that study and I actually used it in my book. I made a reference to it because it's not just in politics, but it happens in entertainment community.
Right.
It happens in corporate world. Yep, it does.
I'm just so over it. I'm like, we need to stop this. This is not okay.
I sponsored a legislation. It was a consumer protection bill. The association that was sort of a big supporter of this bill had a Sacramento legislative reception. So when I was in the legislature, I decided to stop by. And so the president of the association introduced me to one of their members. And this man, and he said, oh, this is Mary Hayashi, and she's our author of the bill. And the board member looked at me and said, oh, I didn't know our author was such a cute Oriental. Yeah. And, and I just I rolled with that and I just laughed it off because I don't.
Wow. Why? What are you going to do in that moment? Yeah.
And I just, at the time I was pretty shocked because it's like, okay, that's so outdated. But I wanted to mention this point, the story in my book, because I just feel that for Asian Americans, we really are not, because of sort of our model minority myth, like we're wealthy and we're smart and we are highly educated and successful. Like people don't really see us as a minority. And often, like people think that's acceptable when things like that would be highly criticized. If I was an African American and if he says something equivalent in that, in that community. And so, I think that there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And the Bay Area, of course, California, there's a lot of Asian Americans, but we're just not seen as a group that needs to, that sort of people should use sensitivity or just be aware, like they don't really, I don't know what they see us as.
Yeah.
Minority, because it's like, gosh, if I was a Latino caucus member, or any other race, something like that would be considered pretty offensive, I think. But the fact that I just kind of rolled with it, I just laughed it off. But then it still is here. I still remember it, even though it's a decade later, and I decided to write about it. I really wanted to just make that point, that's
not okay.
It deserves the same level of respect and sensitivity as anybody else.
Right. You talked earlier on about your professional career and working with mental health for Asian Americans in particular. Can you speak to any of that, the challenges, just because you're starting to allude to that and the differences? So I'd love to hear more about that.
When my sister passed away, she was 17 and she died by suicide. I was 12. That was the same year that we came to this country. Like 6 months later, we immigrated. And the way my parents dealt with her death was probably not the best example. I mean, they were so ashamed that happened. They literally cut her out of all of our family photos. There was no funeral for her. We never talked about her again. It was almost like she never existed. And I have a couple of pictures of her, but it was best to sort of erase that, just the fact that she existed. So when, I was 12 years old, so I accepted that. But when I came here and when I was 19, I went to Cal State Long Beach and decided to take this class. It was called Women's Studies, Introduction to Women's Studies. And I thought at the time, this will make me a better woman, a better wife, a better, a good girl class kind of thing. I had no idea what this was.
All right.
Yeah. And oh my goodness, that really changed my life because that's when I learned about, feminism and all the incredible women literature that existed. And I was just hooked. I thought this is so amazing that women can actually have a career or have a job. And this is very exciting. That class sort of allowed me to, I think, that was the aha moment that allowed me to break away from my family and move up to the Bay Area and kind of start my own life. And I kept thinking about sort of my sister. And when I got through college, I thought, I really want to do something about this because so many Asian American families suffer in silence. And as long as they're doing that, nobody's gonna seek help. Mm-hmm. And so when I started, looking into some of the limited data that existed at the time, the elderly Japanese American women at the time had the highest suicide rate in the United States.
What?
Yeah, but nobody was talking about that.
Wow.
I thought, I am going to start an organization because even the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention does not understand our population, and they do all the data collection. And then, the federal, monies in the federal government are sort of decided based on their data. And so I started lobbying them on data collection efforts, and I started raising money to do my own data collection efforts. So I did a study, for instance, on tobacco use among Asian Americans in different languages, because a lot of Asian Americans don't speak English and they don't participate in English surveys. So I started gathering information, lobbying Congress to push them to do better data collection in Asian American women with respect to mental illness. And so that was really my passion, and really just stemming out of my experience, my personal experience, with my older sister, and wanting to help women, girls like her out there who maybe she just needed some help. I don't know. I really don't know what happened to her, but we could do better in educating, outreach, and helping and supporting young people to seek help, because there are resources out there. From that to starting an organization, and then I met Darren Steinberg, who was a champion of mental health. He gave me an opportunity to work on a ballot measure here in California. It was a 1% tax on millionaires to create mental health funding. So I worked on the campaign. We passed it. And the governor appointed me to serve on the commission. So I was on the mental health commission for almost 10 years. My first legislation after winning assembly was AB 509, creating a California statewide office of suicide prevention. So I really feel like your personal and sort of professional journey, and for, at least for me, because I'm not supposed to be doing this, like the good girl training in me.
Right.
Get married and have kids. So all of these sort of personal and professional journeys for the last 30 years, almost spending like 30 years now, really, it was my older sister passing, and the way my family dealt with it and the way the Asian American community dealt with that. And I hope that I was able to contribute to the change and the awareness. And I think stigma still exists in the community and in the general public overall, but hopefully we made a dent, and hopefully we changed lives and helped people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I am so grateful for you and your journey and just the work you're doing. It's just so impactful. And I really thank you for showing us that connection between what we're passionate about, what we love, the causes that we want to advocate for, and then a career, right? A career that we can create as part of that. And really, it doesn't have to be separate. We don't have to contort ourselves and lose sight of what really matters to us in order to have success. And you're such a great, profound example of that. I'm so grateful. As we kind of wrap up today, I actually have 2 questions. Why do you, and we've alluded to this, but it's always worth saying because I always get something extra special out of my guests. Why do you personally feel motivated to have a voice at the table?
We covered a lot about, my sort of personal background and
right.
my motivation, but certainly just, going back to the book, like you said, it was just providing these examples of other women.
Yeah. It's like you gave everybody else a voice too. You're giving, like, it's almost like you're taking your little bubble and then your bubble's bigger. So good.
And the book really confirmed, it's just kind of solidified that yes, this is sort of my journey, but I don't feel that special because everyone I interviewed had a similar story like this, where they run for office because they use their personal experiences. They want to use their personal experiences to change public policy. They want to solve a problem. That was sort of the common theme among all these women, that they run for office or they seek a leadership position because they want to use their personal experiences and advocate for policy issues that impact women and children and people who are often left behind.
Yeah.
That was consistent, 100%. So while I think that my story is unique, everybody in this book, everyone I talked to had such an incredible journey. And Stacy, if I interviewed you, I'm sure I could also put together a nice narrative that talks about, your special journey as well. So I think it's so important for us to remember what we bring to the table. I think that's the best way to sort of answer that question is, through my own experience, I've learned valuable lessons in leadership, but everyone who interviewed had the same goals. That's why they run for office and what they accomplished. Just their personal background really influenced their work.
And so thinking about the woman in the corporate world who's trying to get ahead in her career, she feels like she's hitting that ceiling, those blocks herself. Any final words of advice for her as she continues to grow?
You had talked about the McKinley study earlier, because I follow that stuff pretty closely too. Like how overwhelming number of women are told they're aggressive from their superior, whereas only 1% of men hear that feedback, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. They're pretty aggressive, right? Yeah, exactly.
It is. One thing that I found for the mentoring chapter that's in my book that sort of speaks to women in the corporate sector too is that every woman who succeeded attaining the leadership position that they seek, they all said they had a mentor inside to help them. So I think that's incredibly important. I mean, in politics, it's a game changer because a lot of people, they work for a legislator and then they run for office. And so without that person's infrastructure and support, it's really difficult to win. And so I think that's probably the best sort of relevant advice that I can offer is, finding that network of support and finding that mentor. And you don't need like 10 people. Sometimes you just need one person who believes in you, and mentoring doesn't mean, somebody who is higher than you. You could also have peer mentoring, somebody who's equal to you. You just need someone who can support you. And just that one person in your life could really change the trajectory. And I really believe that.
Yeah, I do too. That's so good. All right. I recommend everybody buy your book, Women in Politics, Breaking Down the Barriers to Achieve True Representation. And we will link to that in the show notes. Any other ways that our listeners can connect with you?
The best way is to go to my website, maryhayashi.com. Of course, the book is on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and all the other retailers. But I recently found out that bookshop.org, if you purchase the book through them, a portion of the money goes to your local bookstores. They share the profit. So I'm now like promoting bookshop.org.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for this. I really enjoyed this conversation and honored to be part of your orbit here. So thank you.
Yeah, me as well. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for everything. Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today. Yourpromotabilityscore.com and let me know how it goes.